Thank you. Thank you very much, Nick. And it's such a pleasure to be with you all on this hot, sunny day. Thank you for giving me your time. Now, what always happens when you share screens on Google Meet, as you all know, is I don't see anybody now. I just see my own deck. So please, if you've got anything, do feel free to jump in, interrupt. I know Nick said don't, but I don't mind if you do it all, because I want this to be an interactive session. Or I'm going to go quite fast through a lot of different things, and then at the end I would love it to just get some feedback from you and insights, and let's just see if we can have a little conversation about how this all makes you feel and perhaps what we can do together about it. So you'll notice that very rarely do I want to talk about the problem. I think that talking about the plastic problem is so boring. We all know. I never go and talk. I do things like this because why would I go to an ocean summit when everybody in the room knows about it? And guess what? It's got worse. So I'm much more interested in talking to the business community because this is where I believe change is going to happen. My background is I'm an entrepreneur. I'm the most least likely eco-warrior you'll ever meet. And I came to this late and then I couldn't not get involved in some way. So that gives you a little bit of context of why perhaps we have a very different approach to everything, which is incredibly pro-business and pro-solution. So I'm going to whistle through a few slides that talk about these 6 words: truth, risk, responsibility, legacy, opportunity, and hope. Because definitely right now, one thing we all need is hope. And a few plastic facts, much as I'm not going to dwell on the problem at all. One thing is undeniable, that despite all the rhetoric and the headline grabbing and everything that you have seen, plastic production is up and is forecast to incredibly escalate in the next 18 years to a 3-fold in what we are currently producing. And therefore, plastic pollution, of course, will go up as well. I love little simple analogies, so just so that we can get our head around, how big is the problem we're talking about? And you look at just the plastic bottles alone, one small use of plastic, every single year they go halfway to the sun. So you can imagine how many times have we been to the sun and back and the sun and back. Yesterday, I was on a panel actually talking about this, which is soil. And I don't know if anybody has seen the film Kiss the Ground. And if you haven't, I highly recommend it because it just makes you kind of fall in love with dirt. And soil, the health of our soil is of such paramount importance. And yet we talk about the oceans and the plastic crisis in the oceans all the time. And we rarely talk about what we've done to the soil. There's actually up to 23 times as much plastic in our soil as there is in our oceans. And we, of course, focus an awful lot on plastic packaging because that's the visible kind of plastic that we see. And yet 60% of all our clothing is actually made out of plastic. 70% of all ocean microfibers derive from us simply washing our clothes. Often you will hear recycling is going to be the answer. We need to invest in more infrastructure. We have been swallowing this little placebo pill for decades. Recycling plastic is never going to be the answer. And in fact, global recycling rates are now dropping from that much cited 9% to 7%. So where does all this waste go? Well, as you will probably be aware, we ship a huge amount of it abroad. And the US, even though most plastic in the US is either incinerated or largely landfilled, a huge amount of it is actually exported. And Europe, much as we may believe, those Germans and how good they are at sorting it in their homes, they all, including us, actually export a vast quantity of plastic. If you look at the per capita production of plastic waste, the Americans are top of that league, and the UK are number 2. So when you hear people saying, oh, I think that this is an issue with 9 rivers coming out of Asia, you really have to question whose waste is it? Whose plastic is it? Because we have been sending our waste, shamefully, in my opinion, to some of the poorest people on the planet, expecting them to deal with it. And this is the Times only 3 weeks ago, where it was yet again brought to light that we are exporting up to 200 huge shipping containers every single month to Turkey alone for the UK. And finally, rather than our government, who we've been lobbying for 2 years now to ban this, the Turkish government had to say, we no longer want to be the rubbish dump for Britain. So you'll be aware that every single industry that we work with, that I'm sure you work with now, I mean, you're not a business if you don't have some kind of plastic charter or pledge or policy, because It's so public facing, the plastic issue. So everybody is trying to take action on it. But we've got to be aware of this myth that words equal action, because every one of the voluntary commitments, and this includes the EU Plastic Pact, the Single-Use Plastic Pact, it includes the UK Plastic Pact, everything you may have seen from organisations like WRAP, it includes every global government and industry commitment. They're all failing. And the reason they can fail is because, of course, they're voluntary and there is no consequence. And we all know from having kids, if there is no consequence to failure, then you will continue to just do the wrong thing. And more scarily for me, there is a Pew Foundation report, and if anybody's interested, it's called Breaking the Plastic Wave, written by Systemic, who are, I hate me saying it, but they're like a green McKinsey. And it's one of the most authoritative reports on plastic and what we need to do to get out of this mess. And this is one of the facts that comes out of it that really struck me right between the eyes, that even if every one of those voluntary commitments from governments and industry, even if they succeeded, we would reduce the trebling of plastic production by 7%. So we'll have 3 times the amount of plastic, and everything that we're currently trying to do is only going to reduce it by 7%. So clearly, it doesn't work. Voluntary doesn't work. And one of the things that we're very involved in is working with the Global Treaty Dialogues as part of the Stewardship Council to try and create momentum and a consensus platform for the UN, who will be sitting in February next year to discuss the Paris Agreement on plastics. 78 countries already are calling for this, and we need industry to really help accelerate the pace of it. So one of the things that I get pushback with all the time is this, but surely, Sian, it's not really about plastic. We'll deal with plastic later. Right now, we've got to talk about carbon. We've got to reduce greenhouse gases. And again, one of the things that somehow the plastics industry, aka the fossil fuel industry, have managed to do this extraordinary feat of decoupling the carbon crisis and the plastic crisis from the plastic crisis. When in reality, 19% of that 1.5 degree carbon budget that we all know that we have to stick within is going to be used by the plastics industry alone by 2040. And every ton of plastic is pumping out 5 tons of CO2. So we move on to responsibility, and it struck me the other day that I don't understand how we've allowed this world to evolve, where ExxonMobil, that Valdez oil spill that we all saw splashed across the media headlines, we all knew who to blame for that. We all knew who had to pay the fines. We knew who had to actually go and clean up that mess. And yet, a very similar, slightly different looking, but another form of fossil fuel pollution, and I'm citing Coca-Cola here with their 120 billion plastic bottles that they pump out every single year. They have zero responsibility for the impact that their fossil fuel pollution causes the environment. How have we allowed this to happen? So we always look at, so whose job is it to fix it? Is it us? Is it the shopping public? Is it business? Or is it governments? And really the sweet spot for us is that big in the middle. If I look at government, business, and the public, and I think of it like a burger, the public are completely disempowered in this. People buy what they are sold. It's industry's job, it's business's job to sell them something different, and it's government's job to mandate that they do it much faster. Because I don't think it's any of these things. It's not a litter, waste, or pollution problem. What we're looking at here is a production problem. Plastic is a design problem. We're using an indestructible and toxic material for things that are, by their very nature, impermanent. We're using them for things that are used once and thrown away. And I would also rile a little against this, where I meet with people like Amazon who will say, Sian, when our customer tells us, when the consumer tells us that we want the change, then we will give them the change. But until they tell us, we're not going to do anything. And what I find extraordinary is I constantly am given this phrase of the ethical consumer, and just that, when did this happen? When did us in our shopping habits have to make up for the misdemeanor of industry, of the big guys? And it also made me question this word consumer. And when I looked into it, because now, we all use that word consumer. We call ourselves consumers. We talk about consumer rights. And how did this happen? This is a relatively new phrase that we have adopted. And when you look back at the etymology of this word consumer, I find it really interesting that it's a 15th century word that actually means to squander or to waste. When the reality is, of course, We now talk about how we don't want to be consumers and be considered vessels to be filled. We want to be citizens. We want to belong and to contribute. So at A Plastic Planet, we look at what are the levers of plastic change. So we work on these areas, which are, of course, taxation. We know we need new fiscal policy. One of the things we've been pushing for, but I feel particularly ashamed about, is the amount of waste that we send to developing countries, particularly, and now to Turkey. So we need laws for this. We need plastic taxes. We need laws to ban the export of our plastic waste. Every country needs to deal with its own dirt. We talk about corporate risk as a lever of change, because one of the things we're very involved in is the Plastic Health Coalition, which is this bringing together of all the environmental toxicologists and the doctors and the scientists to irrefutably prove the impact on human health. And then we work on education, because, of course, education is the key to everything. But we're not talking about how do we educate children, because they get it in a nanosecond. They're not the ones that need educating. It's us. It's the grown-ups. It's the people that made this mess. We're the ones that need the educating. So we founded A Plastic Planet as an organization with a very simple goal, which is just to ignite and inspire the world to turn off the plastic tap. Because at the moment, there's so much focus on the wrong end of the pipe. And, like the Alliance for Ocean Plastic Waste and all of these organizations that are given billions by the big consumer brands, they'd rather focus on that end of the pipe than focus on the beginning, which is, of course, we just need less plastic in the first place. So these are, everybody loves a good old pillar. And this is how we achieve our vision. And it's through education. I'm going to talk a little bit about the global platform that we're building. I'd love to have a further conversation with you guys at Google about it. We do a lot of media-driven campaigns just to keep that strong media spotlight on the issue, lobbying and legislation that I've mentioned already, and then, of course, working with industry to identify solutions, because we don't believe that attacking industry is the way from the outside. We believe we have to ignite industry from the inside and help them change, because this philosophy I totally believe in, which is no blame, no guilt. Those emotions, they just stultify us. They stop us moving forward. What we've always got to focus on is, let's stop talking about the problem. We know it's a problem and it gets worse every day. Instead, let's focus on solutions. So our work is always that, of focusing on solutions. And I use this phrase sometimes, which is, how can we prototype a future? So when we started some 4 years ago, this was our first campaign, where we thought, wouldn't it be amazing if supermarkets would just give us an aisle, just give us choice, so that we had one aisle. Now we know what we know, that we could walk down and we could buy plastic free. And it took us a year, but finally we met an inspirational supermarket owner in Amsterdam, 74 supermarkets, and he helped us open the world's first plastic free aisle. Enormous media attention, and this became a real catalyst for change. I've mentioned already the Plastic Health Coalition. The next health summit will be in October this year. Obviously, last year was a tricky year for people to get together. But I think when we know, and there is so much science out there already of plastic and the toxins within plastic in placenta, in unborn babies, crossing the blood-brain barrier, plastic in our blood, all of these things, we know what is happening within the ecosystem, and therefore we should really be concerned about what it's doing to us. And I mentioned also this whole thing of creating plastic laws, because this is the only way that we see that it would be possible for industry to change. We have to change it from being a nice to being a have to. So some of the things that we're doing are on this list here. And the one at the bottom is lobbying for a ban on non-food sachets. So this is something that we launched in February last year. Perfect timing pre-pandemic, where suddenly, of course, everything is now single dose and wrapped in plastic, because everybody's paranoid that plastic is the only material that can protect us. So we launched a campaign earlier last year, which was really focused on what I believe is really a pernicious use of plastic. It's the ultimate in the kind of grab and go, single dose, absolutely uncollectible, valueless, unrecyclable. And we are producing 855 billion of these every single year, 12 times to the moon and back. But because we don't believe in just calling on governments to ban something, which of course we are in the EU and the UK, we're also working with Kraft Heinz. And the good news is that after a 6-month fast-track project, working with Kraft Heinz on what I believe is probably one of the most iconic food sachets, Heinz tomato ketchup, we now have 6 different solutions, all of which will qualify for that plastic-free certification mark that you can see on the one on the right, and all of which Kraft Heinz have never seen before. Because we've become a bit of a magnet for materials and coatings and systems changes, because they understand what we're trying to do and how very solutions focused we are and how agnostic we are. And we can put people together that perhaps have never worked together before to create materials that have never been seen before. So this is our certification scheme that we launched 2 years ago. And this is now ramping up globally. And this sits on the front of packaging and products to certify that they're 100% plastic free. And then we also have this mark, which is what we call our commitment mark, which really helps industries who want to come off that plastic path to ruin, and they want to step onto a different path, but recognizing no business will ever be plastic free. And as the owners of the plastic free certification scheme, we feel very strongly that we need to preserve the integrity, the value in those words, because a bit like organic or natural, it's just, they've become so devalued in our language. And plastic free needs to be something that is really, there is a certain level that you need to achieve for it. So this is a 3-year commitment from industry, and we work with organizations like Soho House Group, with Angle Poised Lights, with luxury family hotels. We're just starting a project with Virgin Wines. We don't work with many organizations, but we always want to work with the ones that we believe lead that market, so that it will then drag the rest of that market through with it. And then I come on to hope and opportunity and where I see the future lying. And this is a project I feel incredibly passionately about, because Unilever are the 5th biggest polluter on the planet. And when they take an everyday product like deodorant, and I don't know if you can actually see me or if you can just see the slides, but this is that product, and it's made out of stainless steel. And it's their Dove refillable deodorant. It launched in the US in February this year. The great news is it's huge commercial success. But this is the beginning of an absolute system change. They could have made it more sustainable by taking that lump of plastic and replacing it with a brown paper tube or something. But no, instead what they've done, what I love about this, is they've elevated sustainability. They've taken it off that forest floor. And they've, all that kind of knitted armpit, hairy sandal, what we think of when we hear the word sustainable, that denial. And they've made something that's so beautiful that you want it. And then it happens to be plastic free. And this, I think, is going to be this is the direction of travel that we really want to see. On the 1st of July this year, we're launching a big campaign about plastic and fashion. I've mentioned already about the huge volume of clothing. The fashion industry is the 2nd biggest polluter on the planet, and a massive part of that pollution footprint is the fact that they use fossil fuel plastic. And I cannot tell you how much the plastics industry and the fashion industry, they don't even want to talk about this. They want to talk about resell, they want to talk about recycled polymers, all of those things. What they don't want to talk about is the fact that we have to stop using fossil fuel plastic for making our clothing. It's not good for us. So this is a plastic-free fashion movement that we will be launching with a big sustainability call and a transparency call, asking all the clothing brands to at least tell us, because I'm pretty sure most of you are thinking, so what you're telling me, 60% of my wardrobe is made out of plastic. Every time I wash it, every time I wear it, nanofibers are just being shed into the air. We're breathing them in, we're breathing in our clothes, and nobody knows. And this is something that we feel the public have a right to know. And then this is what we believe is going to be the biggest game changer of all. This is our biggest launch to date, which is the creation of this global platform on plasticfree.com, connecting what I think is one of the most, really the overlooked part of the change-making potential, which is the design community. And we need to connect them with the materials makers, the systems changers, the converters. And we need to give them a platform that speaks the language of designers, that helps them push back against that inevitable brief with case studies, rich in content, so that they can say to their clients, or perhaps we can use a different material in the first place. And as ever, as you can imagine, as an entrepreneur, this is what I'm always looking at. Where is the opportunity here? And I feel that what has happened is that the pandemic has has really accelerated everything. That much as last year was definitely a backward step in the use of single-use plastics, what has happened now is that there is this reawakening of the fact that we need to treat nature differently. We need to have a different relationship with nature. And businesses, I feel, you will either step across the line that has been riven across the world of business, and you will reinvent and reimagine what you do now, and you will be the future success stories. Or if you don't, and if you don't reimagine, and if you don't prototype a new future for your own business, then you will be a future dinosaur. And these are some of the opportunities that I see that I think are so exciting, that I'm looking at the plant proteins and the agri-waste, the new biomaterials that we're using. And when we're talking about circularity, rather than trying to shoehorn plastic, which comes from an unsustainable source to start with. So there's nothing circular about downcycling plastic, but really working with true products and materials that do fit into a circular model. I don't know if any of you are aware of Kate Raworth and her donut economic model, which I am a huge fan of. And I love this whole idea of focusing on thriving, the planet thriving, and society thriving, and business thriving, rather than this constant goal of unsustainable growth. Products of permanence and new materials that we're going to be working with. Here's just a few of the things, and this is something actually out of the US, where this guy is actually taking nutrients. He's taking the most abundant material on the planet, which is cellulose, and he's making things that he calls not biomaterials, but nutrients, new materials that will replace leather and will replace fabrics. And I think this is where we're seeing some really exciting opportunities. And then also looking at the product. How can we, we're always looking at the packaging. Sometimes let's look at the product. Why does it have to be a liquid in the first place? And this is just a little video showing you a zero waste body wash, where you take the sachet into the shower, you tear that open, the sachet will just disappear. And this is a fabric biomaterial that contains the foam that again just disappears. So again, I think it's that whole, let's look at the product rather than simply changing the packaging. Permanent packaging, I think, can you imagine opening your bathroom door, your bathroom cupboards, looking in your kitchen and seeing things of beauty and permanence rather than a whole load of plastic? This is something from the newspapers today of Unilever now rolling out one of their big refill projects. And again, I love that this isn't in the high-end supermarkets. This is in the co-op. This is in Asda. So it's absolutely mass market. And then also when we're looking at systems change, this is our Gramo coming out of South America, where buying through an app, you buy exactly what you want and you get delivered when you want it. And this is something that is, we run the Dieline Awards over in the US for plastic free. And this was the winner 2 weeks ago that I wanted to show you, because I look at this and just think how incredible that the billions of plastic prescription pill bottles will now no longer be needed, because they've managed to devise out of a simple piece of board a paper prescription bottle that will have the child lock and everything else that we need. So I'm going to wrap up now with just a few thoughts on how has this happened? This thing called waste. I think that there's no coincidence that our bin liners are black. I think they're little bin liners of shame, that we pop them outside and we hope that miraculously some recycling fairies will deal with them. Waste isn't normal. 2 billion tons of material is used as waste by humans every single year. And we're now at a position where I feel we, the people who are in the positions of power, particularly working within industries like your own, we are the ones that need to reimagine this more positive future. None of it is going to be easy. And so much of it is going to be about collaboration. And it is definitely about creating legacy. And I see so often now, I talk to companies where they're just kind of treading water, thinking, if I just carry on talking about recycled polymers and 30% recycled content, then perhaps somebody will reinvent a different material. It's not going to happen, because fundamentally, the status quo is what is wrong. Hyperconsumption is what is wrong. And plastic really is the canary in the coal mine for that. And when we look at what is our legacy? What can we do in order to have an impact on what I believe is the gateway? If we fix plastic, we will fix so much else. Then it's worth just having a little perspective on who are we going to impact with the decisions that we make in the next 8.5 years. And I love this visual, which comes from a book called How to Be a Good Ancestor. And that gray circle is the dead. And the little green circle is the 7.7 billion living today. And that massive orange circle is those who are yet to be born. And the things that we decide now, the decisions that we make, the projects that we strive for today, those are the people that we are going to impact. And my final statement is this, and I don't know if you're feeling this in your business right now, but this is a quote from Trudeau that I loved, which is, the pace of change has never been this fast, and yet it will never be this slow again. I feel that every day, don't you? I feel that whatever was okay to say only 6 months ago is no longer enough. Not only is the pace accelerated, but the bar, the level of acceptable change has also massively accelerated. So I'm super excited to be with all of you guys today, because I know that the kind of organization that you work for, you are about pioneering, you are about taking those bold steps, you're about helping people think in a completely different way. So I'm hoping that some of these words have perhaps inspired you to realize that much as you may think plastic is not an issue for your organization, you have enormous influence on how we can help or ignite and inspire the world to turn off that plastic tap. Thank you.